Hello, beautiful souls. My name is Carolyn. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. This channel is all about true crime, mystery, and anything abnormal. And today I've got a brutal one for you. On an April afternoon in 1996, a man casually walked into a Manchester police station to report that his girlfriend had drowned in a bathtub. The man was 48-year-old James Patterson Smith, and his girlfriend was just a 17-year-old child. The truth was, James Patterson Smith was a sadist, a psychopath, and had subjected this young girl to such horrific torture. It's almost unbelievable. Not only had he drowned her, but he had subjected her to 3 weeks of some of the most brutal torture I have ever heard of. When the police reached the crime scene, a lot of really seasoned detectives were brought to tears at how horrific the scene was, and them finding out how much this poor girl had endured before she died. So now we're going to go back 3 years. Kelly Ann Bates was a sweet, loving, adorable 14-year-old girl. She told her parents, Margaret and Tommy Bates, that she had a boyfriend. This was her first boyfriend, and she was really excited. Her parents naturally assumed that her boyfriend was a teenage boy, a boy she went to school with. And they had always wanted to raise Kelly with a lot of independence. So she was definitely given a lot of room to roam, and her parents weren't really all up in her business, wanting to know every detail. They really tried and thought the best thing to do was to try to give her a lot of independence so that she could grow and learn to make responsible decisions. And they naively never asked to meet this boyfriend. And it wasn't long before Kelly started staying out overnight at her boyfriend's. She would lie to her parents and tell them that she was staying at her friend Rachel's house. Her parents didn't believe her. They didn't believe that she was staying at her friend's house. They really believed that she was with her boyfriend. And it's hard to understand, for me at least, this decision, but she dated this man who her parents thought was a boy for 2 years before they insisted on meeting him. And I can understand, you want to give your children, some independence, but at 14, it's her first boyfriend, and she's dated him for 2 years. So it's obviously a real relationship, and they never insisted on meeting him. I found this choice strange, but this is what her parents did. They allowed her to date this boy, who was really a grown-ass man, for 2 years before they insisted that, okay, time's a ticking, we need to meet this boy. And at this time, her parents were getting really concerned about her whereabouts. Where was she? Who was she with? They now wanted a lot more information. And her parents were not the only ones concerned with Kelly's whereabouts. Her boyfriend, Dave, who his real name wasn't Dave, but she told her parents she was dating a boy named Dave, and he would call saying he was Dave and asking about Kelly's whereabouts. What they didn't realize was this man was already starting to tighten the control that he had over Kelly. When Kelly was 16, she told her parents she was dropping out of high school and moving in with her boyfriend. This was when the parents insisted that they meet him. And this story, as I had mentioned, was in Manchester. So this is taking place in England. And in England, the age of consent is 16. And now her parents were livid, and they contacted the police and wanted help. But unfortunately, with UK laws, at 16, she was considered an adult, and there was nothing that the police or her parents could do. At this point, Kelly's parents insisted on meeting this boyfriend. And when he showed up, it wasn't a boy that showed up. It was a full-grown man. Kelly, and he was still going by Dave. They kept lying to the parents saying his name was Dave. His name is really James, but the parents think his name is James. When he showed up, as shocked as they were to see, okay, this isn't a boy, this is a man. And they lied and said that he was 36 years old. The truth was, he was 48 years old. So this 16-year-old girl is dating a 48-year-old man who was older than Kelly's father, and there was absolutely nothing that her parents could do to stop her. And Kelly, she was young and naive, and she really thought this was a relationship that was about love, and they were madly in love with each other, and she really believed this man loved her. But the truth was, for James, aka Dave, this was about power and control. There was no love at all. And from this point on, James controlled every single thing that Kelly did. And Kelly's demeanor changed, and her parents started seeing less and less of her. She used to be this bubbly, happy, bright young girl, and she had just changed, and her parents saw her and thought, she's depressed, she's very stressed out, she's very unhappy, and they did try to intervene. They tried to convince Kelly that this was not a good situation. They wanted her to come home, but Kelly refused. She thought she was in love. And then Kelly started showing up to her parents' house with bruises all over her. One time she showed up and the entire side of her face was black and blue. And her mother, as anyone would be, was panicked and scared and asking her what happened. And Kelly lied and said that she had been walking down the street and a bunch of girls had jumped her and beat her up, and that was how she received the injuries. But her parents weren't falling for any of this. Her parents were extremely, extremely concerned and really believed that she was being abused. Because it wasn't one time that she showed up with bruises. Every time she showed up, she was bruised. And her parents didn't know that James had a long history of abusing women. Kelly was not the first. And Kelly's mother contacted the police and told them that her daughter was being abused and she needed help. And she was looking for guidance from the police to see what she could do to protect her daughter. The police told her to make a doctor's appointment and have Kelly go to the doctor so they could document the injuries that she was sustaining. But again, Kelly was 16 and considered an adult, so she didn't want to go to a doctor's appointment, and her mother couldn't force her. And her mother could tell that the abuse was escalating. Kelly showed up one time with a bite mark, a very, very deep bite mark on her arm. And her mother, again, is horrified and terrified for her daughter. But Kelly just said she had fallen on a chain link fence, and that was how she had the mark on her arm. Her mother knew this wasn't true. In November 1985, Kelly's mother sat down with her and had a really serious conversation and begged her to leave this man. And unfortunately, Kelly did not want to leave him. And she told her mother that she would be seeing a lot less of her, because to Kelly, The most important thing to her was to protect her relationship. So if anyone threatened that, she wanted nothing to do with them. And this is so common in cases where someone is being abused. They feel this loyalty to protect their abuser. And like, this started, she was 14 years old when this started. So this man had had complete control over her for 2 years at this point, starting at such a young age, that there was nothing her mother or father were doing was helping to get their daughter out of this situation. And over the next few months, Kelly called her mother and said she got a job at a factory and she was working very long hours. So she was really busy, and that's why she wasn't able to see her parents, but she would call occasionally. And eventually the phone calls stopped. In March 1996, Kelly's mother received a Mother's Day card and her father received a birthday card. And both of them were signed as though it was from Kelly, but they could tell very clearly from the handwriting that their daughter is not the one who wrote these cards. And at this point, James had complete control over Kelly, and the parents really felt like he was toying with them at this point. And then comes April 1996, when he had walked into the Manchester police station and said she had drowned. The police arrived at the home and it was a bloodbath. It was very obvious that this was much more than a drowning, an accidental drowning. I don't know if I mentioned that when I've been telling this, but James claimed that she had accidentally drowned in the bathtub. That was the story he showed up with at the police station. And the police walked in, and it was clear that there was so much more that had gone on. And immediately they did not believe that she had accidentally drowned. 17-year-old Kelly had drowned, but it wasn't accidental. And for 3 weeks before she was drowned, she had suffered horrible, horrible torture. My heart just breaks for this young girl who endured more than I could ever imagine. I can't, it's when I'm going to go through the details, not too intense, but while I'm going through the details of everything that she suffered, just know that it's really hard to hear. The pathologist noted over 150 injuries to Kelly's body, including having her eyes gouged out. And there were stab wounds in her eye sockets. And there was mutilation to her ears, her mouth, and her genitalia. Her head was partially scalped. She had had scalding, boiling water poured on her, and she had been burned with an iron, stabbed with multiple different instruments, knives, scissors. There was so many wounds, and her knees had been kicked in and both were broken. And as the police were investigating the scene, there was Kelly's blood in every single room. The house was covered in traces of Kelly's blood. Evidence revealed that she had been tied to a radiator with her hair, and the injuries to her eyes, she had actually received those injuries a week before she was finally drowned. So for a week, this girl had those injuries to her eyes and she was still alive. She had not received water for several days and she had obviously been starved. She had lost 45 pounds. And investigators revealed that this was a very progressive pattern for James. He had been married before and his wife left him because of his violence towards her. After the divorce from his wife, he dated a 22-year-old girl who told police that she had been his punching bag even while she was pregnant. And their relationship ended when James had attempted to drown her. There was also another 15-year-old girl he had dated, and she too claimed that he had tried to drown her. And after all the evidence was given in court, the jury, it took them less than an hour to find him guilty. I mean, there was no question that this man was guilty, and there was no question that he was an evil, sadistic man who needed to be severely punished. As they're going through the trial, they're obviously showing the jury all of these pictures of all of the injuries that this poor young girl sustained. And when the trial was over, the judge was so concerned about what the jury had witnessed and how traumatic it would be for them to have seen all of the pictures, all of the evidence that they had gone through. And the judge decided that they would offer the jury trauma counseling from what they had experienced, just looking at the pictures and hearing the details of what this girl went through. And every single jury member accepted the counseling. Every single jury member needed trauma counseling just from hearing about and seeing what this girl went through. And they were jury members, they were grown adults. And this was something that a young girl had gone through. James Patterson Smith was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years. And a minimum of 20 years? A minimum of 20 years. I did look into it and I couldn't find anything that he had been released or anything like that, but it was a minimum of 20 years and hopefully he will never ever be let out of prison. And Kelly was buried on the day before her 18th birthday. So I know this was probably a rough one to hear. It was definitely a hard one to research, but thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you next week in the next video. Have an amazing week.